Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
Everything is exactly the way it was before. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same. I'm sorry.
Hello. Oh, that's weird. Welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast stuck in its own time loop, right along with the movies we discuss. In this season, we're taking a look at time crimes.
Oh, that's still weird. I can't get over that yet. But anyways, I am your host, Bubbawheat from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights, and in this episode, we are discussing Jess's second loop in Triangle that starts at 44 minutes and 30 seconds. With Jess looking over the railing at herself and the others approaching the Aeolus on the second overturned triangle, and ends at 68 minutes and 41 seconds, with Jess walking away from a deck full of dead Sallys to prepare for the third arrival of the overturned triangle. And joining me today is returning guest Eric Deutsch from Flash Gordon Minutes. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. I'm having a much better day than Jess.
Yes, absolutely. So before we get started into it, how did you discover Triangle, and what was your first watching experience? Because I know that this is a lesser known movie than some of the than something like Groundhog Day that everybody's heard of.
Yeah, I love time loop movies, and I love mind f movies. So I'm always Googling online for what are the latest ones that I might have never heard of. And a few years ago, and doing some of that Googling, I came across this movie on a list. So I went ahead and watched it. Absolutely loved it. And then I watched it the second time in preparation for coming on the show.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, but with all of these, I have enjoyed them more as I've been digging into them. I haven't hit one yet that I have not liked more, that hasn't held up to digging into them with a fine-tooth comb like I'm doing in this podcast.
Yeah, that's what's great about this genre of movies, right? Is you can always watch it again and pick up so much more, and there's always ways to look into certain aspects of it deeper.
Yeah, especially with the ones that are well made, and I do think that this fits into one of those well-made time loop movies.
Agreed.
But let's go ahead and dig into today's loop, and it starts off with just looking over the railing, and it just finished up. We still hear a little bit of the anchors away on the record player, and she kind of starts spying on the second group of castaways, I suppose we could call them.
Sure.
We get hints of the repeated dialogue from the first loop, and we get this different perspective with just two. I think especially in this part, it's a little bit harder to know exactly what to call, like how to differentiate the different Jesses that are here.
Yeah, I think at this point of the movie, I think saying Jess 2 is accurate. Maybe later on in the movie it gets a little tougher, but I think right now I think you can get away with it.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I think of it too, because I mean, you could say that this is still just one in the second loop, and then you have a new Jess 1 or Jess 4 or Jess 1B. But I think I do like sticking with the fact that this Jess has now become Jess 2 in this time loop. And then the Jess that just entered the ship is the new Jess 1.
Yeah, I like that.
And then the Baghead Jess is Jess 3.
Baghead Jess works just on its own.
There's not a whole lot. I do like the cutting back and forth between the hiding Jess 2 and then the Jess 1 who keeps looking over her shoulder, because I believe that she was doing that, but we didn't really talk about it that much in the last episode with the looking over her shoulder like something's following them.
Well, because I think at that part of the movie, you're not even you're not looking for that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
At that part of the movie, you don't even know yet. If you're coming into this movie cold, you don't even know this is a time loop movie. So you're just, wondering, all right, something weird is going on, but you don't know what. So you're not even necessarily paying attention to subtle motions that she might be doing, like looking over her shoulder.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that even at this point, even though she hasn't really been on the Aeolus that long, that we already get a sense that Jess too has a feel for the ship as she's like wandering around and trying to keep ahead of the other group of castaways.
Yeah, almost like the corners she's turning and the corridors she's running down are not her just randomly zigzagging to try to get away, that almost she knows I should turn this corner, or I should run down this corridor, and that way they won't see me.
Yeah, and it's an interesting way to look at this because in a way she's stalking them, but at the same time she's kind of afraid of them, and she's just like spying on them in a way.
Yeah, she's stalking them and hiding from them sort of at the same time, sort of paradoxically, because she's so confused. She's trying to figure out what's going on, basically. She hasn't figured out yet what's going on, and this is her first indication that something much freakier than she thought is going on, and so she's just, trying to figure out, what is this? I don't want these people to see me because, wait a minute, that's my friends and that's me, and aren't they all dead? But at the same time, she's like, I got to figure out what the hell's going on here.
And then we get to the first almost paradox situation where Jess too drops her keys, and I love the look of the shot of the camera backing away in the hallway as she kind of runs away, because this shot explains why Jess 1 found her keys in the first loop.
Yeah, and I don't understand why Jess 2 leaves the keys. I don't feel that she could be of sound enough mind at that point, especially since she doesn't yet know what's going on, to be able to think, oh, I found these keys before, I have to leave them here so that past me can find them. Why does she not pick the keys up? Why does she leave them? All she would have had to do is, reach over, grab them, and she still would have been able to run away.
Yeah, I think she's just, with her state of mind at this point, she's still very, very clearly troubled and still confused, even though she does feel like she's in a very different state of mind in this entire loop than she did at the beginning of the first loop, where she was just like in a daze and just didn't really know what was going on. She was in like a foggy haze, and here she has a little bit more understanding, like she's starting to put the pieces together, and she's in more survival mode. And she just, the sound of the keys just startles her, and then she just runs off without thinking. Plus it's just the excuse to, it's also, the story and audience excuse to have the reason to leave the keys.
Of course, yes. The story reasons.
Yeah. And then she runs and makes her way back to room 237 for the second time.
Which incidentally, so I watched this movie with my 12-year-old son. He has started watching these kind of movies with me. My wife gave up on them. She doesn't like them anymore. So now my older son watches them with me, and he really liked this movie. And we haven't shown our kids the original The Shining yet, but we did show them the TV miniseries from like 20 years ago with Steven Weber in it. So he caught the 237 reference immediately.
That's nice. And I do like, I want to say that the TV version was my first experience with The Shining as well, whenever it first came out on TV because I was a fan of Wings, and so I recognize Steven Weber from that. I do think that the TV version is a good introduction, and then whenever you're a little bit older and you can handle the movie version, then that I think that it just enhances the experience of watching the movie version.
Yeah, that's exactly pretty much what our plan is.
But yeah, she goes into room 237, and I think it's interesting that in the first loop, whenever she went in there, we saw the message, the go to theater from her perspective, and we saw the message reflected in the mirror. And this time it's reversed, where the camera is showing us the message, and it is showing her reflected in the mirror, and she's double. It has the double reflection because it has the mirror within the mirror. So again, we have two images of Jess within the mirror,
which of course makes sense since there's two Jesses at the moment.
Yeah. At least from this Jess's perspective, there's only two Jesses.
Right. Of course, there are many more.
And I do love just some people might say that this film overuses the mirror shots, but I love just how well done most of the mirror shots are, and there are a ton of them. It goes into yet another one as she's going back to the group, and we have this decorative mirror on the wall, and again it's one of the decorative where it's like a square, but then it's like broken up in a decorative way, so it breaks up the image into multiples.
Yeah, and which also mirrors just her image is distorted, just like as over the course of the movie, she herself, her brain, her personality becomes distorted.
Yeah. And that's also, I think, enhanced by the film's constant intercutting between showing us Jess 2 and showing us the reflection of Jess 2, and then also cutting back to the new Jess 1 and her reaction of catching glimpses of Jess 2 off in the distance. And just really creates this sense of unease. And then she runs out to the deck and looks out into the water, and we see the body of Downey floating in the water, being eaten by seagulls.
Yeah, and even though I had seen this movie before, since it had been a few years, I couldn't tell who that was.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until in a future episode when you'll discuss a later part of the movie with the different guests that there's the part of the movie that I actually finally realized who it was down there.
I never recognized it in my first two straight through watches, and I only know that it's Downey because she says that it's Downey whenever she's talking to Victor.
Right.
But I definitely didn't recognize him because I do feel like a lot of the characters that, especially the three guy characters, they don't really have much personality other than people that get killed. And Sally is just one hair above them just because she's the only other woman.
Right.
And so she stands out, but the three guys definitely get confused, and you can pretty much only tell that it's Downey because he doesn't have the beard, I think, so it's not Greg. And it's at this point we think it's unlikely that it would be Victor, so that just leaves Downey as the last possibility. And then we get her noticing the blood on the railing, and I think this shot is interesting because so far every detail that they've pointed out has been something that they showed us in the first loop, like the keys, the Sisyphus discussion, the scene at the dining room and in a way even like Downey's body, because we know that he died in the first loop. But this is a detail that I don't believe was ever specifically shown in the first loop.
I don't think so.
And this is I believe the first time in this loop where it's basically foreshadowing something that they explain in just a few more minutes.
Right.
We get this conversation with Victor, Liam Hemsworth, a very young 18-year-old Liam Hemsworth. And we get the first mention, the first thing he says, "Hey, how'd you get here so fast?" It's almost like a cliche in these kind of doppelganger time travel movies, where it would almost be a joke in a more lighthearted film.
I know that he doesn't really know her that well, and I know that we find out later on he had sort of a weird interaction with her before they got on the boat. But he's very calm as she says these things that are completely impossible, and even as he is somewhat mocking her in what he's saying back to her, he's also sort of doing it in an almost respectful way.
Yeah, he says, I'm going to do you a favor and not tell anybody else about this conversation.
Yeah.
Which, this conversation is her, again, this is almost like a cliche moment and something that would be played for comedy in a different movie, where she is trying to explain the fact that everybody has died already and there's a double of her on the ship. And he just completely doesn't believe her. This is a combination of like the horror movie Harbinger, the horror movie victims never believe, which in a way he's kind of playing off to that horror movie stereotype that he's not believing this Harbinger at this point in the film.
Right. Which, why would he? I mean, in real life, if someone told me what she just said, I'd say, okay, I'm going to turn around and walk away now.
And then it does get to this. I think this is the first real. I don't want to go so far as to say plot hole, but that has the first two really questionable moments in this film, because up until now I think it's been pretty clear cut. Confusing, yes, but everything has made sense if you're following along. But there are two things in here that don't necessarily make sense. One is, where did she get that apple from that she throws to scatter the seagulls?
Did she pick it up when she was? I guess she couldn't have picked it up when she was spying on them back in the dining hall, because they were all standing in front of the fruit table.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I'm gonna look for a no prize here. When she was still Jess 1, she took it and put it in the pocket of her sweater, and it's been in her sweater the whole time.
Yeah, I think that's the best kind of explanation, even though, women's shorts don't have real pockets, so I don't think it would fit in her shorts. And if it was in the pocket of her sweater, apples are pretty heavy, and with all that running around, that would be like flopping around everywhere.
Also, why wouldn't she have used the apple to help defend herself against the hooded wrench wielder?
Yeah, I think the other possible explanation, which would make a little bit more sense, is we do see Victor eating an apple in the first loop. So this could theoretically be the apple that he pulled from the dining room, and he just hadn't finished eating it, even though it looks completely whole in this version.
It looks whole.
We haven't quite gotten to it yet chronologically, but this loop does introduce a bit of the chaos theory, where this loop doesn't happen 100% the same way that it happened the first time around.
Right.
And then the second question is, where did Downey's body go?
Yeah, it couldn't have sunk, correct? I mean, if the birds were all essentially sitting on it, and then she throws the apple, the birds fly away. I don't see that it would have sunk. That doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me either. I think the other possible explanation, because it has been a couple minutes, is that she looked to where she saw the body before, but the Aeolus has actually, moved, like the body it's actually moved away from the body, and the body is like, back in the back of the ship even farther, because the Aeolus is still moving forward, and she saw a different group of seagulls.
Yeah, that works.
But then the other potential, like, previous guest Jake Lewitt, he had a theory, at least at one point, that the other people in this are just figments in her head, and none of them are actually real, and this is just a sign of her madness.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're coming into this movie cold and you don't know that it is a time loop movie yet, you might be starting to think that now, obviously, after the last 5-6 minutes. But at the same time, there have been plenty of movies out there also that mess with your head that it turns out it really is just all in the main character's mind, that they're just losing their grip on reality. And so that's certainly possible.
Yeah, and then we get the first person that this specific Jess actually kills, even though it's accidental. And I mostly like the way that this is choreographed, because if you're not expecting it, it does make sense as something that could possibly happen. She's just kind of grabbing him and, is pushing him back against the wall in order to make him just stop and listen to her. And then there just happens to be a sharp metal spike at head level that goes into the base of his head.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. It's really brutal. And like you said, it's an accident, and it's really incredible that it all starts with this accidental death.
Mm-hmm.
All future deaths are on purpose, basically, but it starts with an accidental death.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that, this one, I mean, it really is, she's 0% at fault here. You really can't blame her. I mean, who would know that when she's, just trying to sort of get him to understand her, that there would be a sharp metal spike right behind his head. But
yeah. And I love the two like little spurts of blood that
it's so good. Yeah, it's so good.
It's like, it's not it's not like extreme gore either.
Right.
Because I mean, in a way we already know, like they already gave us a close up of the wound in the first loop, so we know what's there. And this is like the payoff. We had the setup, and this is the payoff.
And good job, too, I think, by Liam Hemsworth there, like in those few seconds when he's on the spike and before he comes off, that, it just like this grimace of like, what the hell just happened to me? Oh, man, I think I'm in really deep trouble. Ow, I have to get off of this thing.
It's all really great. And then, she is just horrified of what's just happened. And then she runs, and we get another moment of the repetition from the first loop, where she hears the conversation that we've already heard between Greg and Jess 1 about them seeing the blood on the mirror and the message, go to theater.
Have you spoken with any of the previous guests at all on this movie? Never says really how Jess and Greg know each other, correct?
They have a conversation in the whenever they're on the triangle, like whenever they're sailing, and they have the moment where Greg is letting her steer, and they know each other because she works at the diner and a day or two before was the first time that he came to the diner, not specifically to eat, but specifically he came to the diner to ask her on this boating trip.
Oh, okay. I did not pick up I mean, I remember that conversation. I did not pick up at all that that's how he knew her, that she was a waitress at the diner he always go to. In my mind, that was always, he already knew her and she just happened to be a waitress at the diner he went to, but he already knew her because Sally also obviously knows who she is too. Okay, got it.
Yeah, she runs off and ends up in the armory on the Aeolus. And this is where we get, our first two, I think what I would call pile-up moments.
Yep.
Where the first thing she sees is all the scattered, crumpled up notes. And they all say, if they board, kill them all. So let me ask you, if you see a pile of weird notes and that you've never seen before, and you recognize them as potentially your handwriting, how would you determine if it was actually your handwriting? Would you do what she does and take another sheet of paper and copy the message down exactly to double check if your handwriting matches the other notes?
I'll tell you the reason why I wouldn't, because I would be so freaked out by what I saw that I would not want to confirm that it's my handwriting.
You just, this looks a lot like my handwriting, but I'm just going to assume that it's somebody else's that has similar handwriting.
I think I'm going to pretend I never even saw these.
But I guess it makes sense a little bit because, she is in a headspace where she knows that there is a doppelganger of herself already. So this, for her, is just further proof that a previous doppelganger of hers has been here before.
This kind of gets into sort of the larger theory of time loop movies of, was there ever a time where something didn't happen, so then there had to be a first time something happened, or that theory of, well, it's, if you've gone back in time, you've always gone back in time, because then there would never be a reason not to go back in time. If all of the notes are her finding the note and then writing another one to check to see if it's her, then there always was a note there. But that doesn't really make sense, because there has to be a very first time that she wrote that note. Once she realizes she's in a time loop telling future self, this is what you have to do. And so she came up with this logic of the other way to escape. It's, this is really where that kind of whole paradoxical time loop movie theory really can starts to come into play.
But that is one thing that I like about how this movie handles the time loop, because you can kind of understand that there was, or that the first few time loops didn't happen exactly this way. And then it eventually developed a pattern, and then now at this point in time, which this is somewhere around loop 40, I would say. Somewhere between 40 and 50 would be my guess. At this point, it's kind of fallen into this pattern. And it's falls pretty closely to the same pattern each time. Because I do think that, similar to a White Bear that we talked about on the hiatus episode, that she does have maybe not 100% clear memory, but I do think that she has at least some residual memory of the previous loops. And then the more she repeats it, the clearer the memory and the clearer this muscle memory of her repeating these same actions becomes. The next few bits that we see in this armory is we get to see the reveal of the coveralls, and we have this shot of this broken mirror, which is the typical the movie trope of the broken psyche.
Right. Yeah. Yep. We see that outfit. That's wait a minute. That's what that psycho was wearing.
Yeah. And then we have this armory door that has the shotguns And I like and dislike the broken mirror at the same time. I like it because it's a trope for a reason, and especially because this movie has used mirrors so much to this point. And then we have this broken mirror, and then she's looking at herself in the broken mirror. And I do like this moment that, she grabs the shotgun and then she rejects, at least at this point, she is rejecting her descent into madness.
Right.
Like she's fighting it at this point.
Yeah, it's like she's starting to piece together, not fully, but partially at least, what's going on. And she's starting to maybe recognize, I might be that psycho in the hood. Maybe I don't have to be. Maybe I can change this.
Yeah. She sees this locket stuck on the grate, and then as she looks closer, she sees that it is the exact same locket that she's wearing that has a picture of her son and herself and her son. And it's another one of those like causality moments where the act of looking at this locket that's already there is what or the act of looking down and seeing this pile of lockets is what causes her to add another locket to the pile.
Right.
As she, jerks back, and then her locket gets caught on the grate and breaks and falls into the pile. And I tried to do just a rough count, and this in the notes is part of where I get, this is somewhere between loop 40 and 50, because I think there's close to about 40 lockets in this pile.
Okay.
So you can
Yeah,
see
and this one is not quite as tough to establish a first time it happens like the notes are, because this one you could see her in a fit of despair on the very first time she went through this, being on her knees over the grate and just crying, and the locket falling off and falling down into the grate. Like, it's easy to envision a first time the locket falls without it being caused by her looking at the other lockets that have fallen, as opposed to writing that first note for the first time.
Yeah. And then we cut back to Sally and Downey and the trail of blood. That's another repetition from the first loop. And Greg walking into the theater to get shot by Jess 3. And then we get, bloody Victor walking down the hall. And again, the fragmented reflections of Jess 2 now wielding the shotgun and holding the ammunition bag, which is not yet her baghead mask. The thing that I noticed is whenever they do get Jess 2 and Jess 1 confront each other with Victor in the dining room, you can see that this is going back to where the dining room food is all spoiled and all the flowers are dead. Where whenever we caught the glimpse of it earlier, the food was still fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that my theory on this is Victor getting injured by Jess is what caused the change in the Aeolus, and that is the inciting incident that caused the food to spoil. And I didn't think to look at the time, but the clock, it is like 8:15.
Yeah, it looks like 8:15. Yeah.
Which is actually earlier than what it was. It was whenever Jess saw it, because Greg's time was 11:30 and Jess and the Aeolus's time was 8:30.
Right.
So it should actually be later. That one I'm just going to chalk up to a mistake.
Yeah, I think we've just got an editing error there.
Yeah. But I do love this confrontation between Jess 2 and Jess 1 here, and the camera move where at this point we can tell the difference because Jess 1 is still wearing her locket and Jess 2 is missing her locket and looks a little bit more disheveled. And of course has the shotgun.
Well, and I was about to say, she's holding a shotgun. This is really great when she says, "You're not me." It's foreshadowing to the end. When I don't want to get too far ahead in the movie, but just it foreshadows in the end when, sort of, "You're not me," Mom is going to be different now, that wasn't me, I'm different, allows her to rationalize what she's going to do to her other self at the end of the movie. It also is great that she says, more foreshadowing, that she thinks she can break the pattern. The first time it happened, this did not happen. This time Victor doesn't try to strangle her.
Yeah,
and
he
so,
just kind of gives up and slumps.
And so later on, again, at the end of the movie, she thinks she can break the pattern. And so you can see that a lot of the seeds of what happens in the last 5-10 minutes of the movie are planted here in this confrontation.
Yeah. And Jess 2 goes to the theater, and then this whole scene is similar but different again because the first time around it was Jess 1 in the theater with Sally, Downey, and the dead Greg, and now it's Jess 2 in the theater with Sally, Downey, and dead Greg with Baghead Jess up on the balcony.
Right, so that throws us as the viewer also, because now we're like, wait a minute. This is clearly a time loop movie, but things are now happening differently than they did. So, which is good because the more a movie messes with your mind, in my point of view, the more fun it is. So
yeah, and I like that at this point, it's like you're still on Jess 2's side.
Yes.
Like you still think that at this point that maybe she can figure out how to break the cycle. Like you're in maybe a Star Trek time loop mindset where, if she does this enough times, she can figure out how to break the cycle and save everybody.
Yes, we do not know yet at this point in the movie that Jess is the villain of this movie. She's still the hero of the movie for the most part.
Yeah, she does say, "I hit her." So at this point, Jess 2 does know that Baghead Jess is a woman. But do you think that at this point she suspects that that's another Jess, or do you think that she believes that that is, some other random woman? Like, maybe it's crazed Heather, as they suspected in the first loop.
I think that she is afraid that it might be her, but that she is clinging to the belief that it's not, because as of right now, Jess 2 does not consider herself capable of doing the things that the hooded person is doing, and doesn't realize that as events keep happening, she will get to that point. So she's like, well, it can't be me. Again, going back to "you're not me," that's like she said to Jess 1 in the previous scene. That cannot possibly be me because I would never do these things.
Yeah, and
even though she suspects it could be her.
Yeah, and then we get this scene with her leading out, like trying to lead Sally and Downey to safety, and she gives Downey the shotgun and tells him, if anybody comes, shoot them. And I think it's interesting that even though she just tried to explain the situation to Victor, she does not try to explain the doppelganger situation to Downey and Sally. So other than, the story reason, because they have to not know because of what happens just a little bit later, why do you think the character reason is for her not trying to explain this to Downey and Sally?
She's further descending, I think. So she's getting more harried and she's getting more desperate. And so she's not thinking as clearly and probably feels she doesn't have the time to try to tell them. Back when it was Victor, she figured she still had, okay, let me take a few minutes and explain it to this guy. Whereas now, with everything that's happening so fast, she's got to move and she doesn't have time.
Yeah, I can see that. And then after that, she leaves Sally and Downey and returns for Victor, and instead finds the blood trail, which leads overboard with a big a big streak of blood on the railing. So are we safe to assume that this was Jess 3 doing some cleanup?
I would say most definitely.
So how much cleanup do you think that Jess 3 does? Because there is a lot of unexplained moments, like cleaning off the some of the other blood and cleaning up the other bodies that we don't see how they get disposed of.
That is a good question. I am wondering if that may be a simple a behind the scenes reason of we can only do so much in our low budget movie, and let's just make it be like video games, or when you kill someone they just kind of fade away.
They just respawn.
Yeah.
And some things reset, but some things don't.
Yeah.
And I do love this reveal, this audience reveal of Jess 3 as she pulls the bag off her head.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's really excellent. We see there's going to be another loop. I mean,
Yeah.
we now see we get confirmation she's the one in the hood. She's clearly a different Jess because we just saw current Jess run away, and it means we don't know. Oh, okay, we're not done looping. There's going to be another loop because we're going to have to see Jess now. How is she going to get to this point that she's the one in the hood?
Yeah, and the blood streak on her face
Yeah.
is just perfect. It gives this air of menace to her, even though she's not wearing the hood anymore. But she has this, straightforward, not quite unblinking, but this almost just unblinking, purpose-driven walk. She is wearing the coveralls, and she has this like messenger bag. Although I do think that it's interesting that Downey and Sally, they don't question her changing clothes.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yes. Not only that, but you'd think that with her trying to convince them, to think that she's still previous Jess, you'd think she would have acted a little more normal. I mean, I know at this point she's completely gone mentally,
Yeah.
but you'd think she'd at least attempt to not act like a total psycho and make them think that she's the previous version of her.
Yeah, really. And she brings Sally and Downey back once again to room 237 for the knife kill. And she goes pretty hard on Downey. But then we see, do you think that this iteration of Downey had enough strength to get to the mirror and clean off the go to the theater and start writing Jess?
Yeah, boy, it's tough because, I mean, he gets stabbed so much. I mean, she really, what she does to him. I mean, obviously she's completely gone. I mean, something very intense is going to happen to her that we haven't seen yet to get her into this state.
Yeah, and she also goes for the neck first.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I mean, and she's just like, I mean, this is like Jason Voorhees level of the constant, how much she stabs this guy. Could he have I mean, in real life, there's no way. But, movies, we often see characters who really should be dead, crawl around and get that one last important plot thing done,
Yeah, and then, after this, we get this whole, mini chase scene with Jess 2 and Sally. And we get the other repetition moment with the radio message. So this explains what the mysterious radio message free time loop on the triangle was.
And I missed it. I forgot to write this down. Does she say she's killing everyone? Is that what she says? And if so, when they heard the SOS message at the beginning of the movie, did we hear the person say the word she's? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because if it did, if you were paying attention, that gives a lot of way early on that it's a she.
I don't remember. I think the she is partially cut out by static.
Okay, so then that would explain it then. Okay.
And I think you just hear killing everyone.
Okay, got it.
And then I do think that this is another important moment and something that Jess 2 doesn't, I guess, discounts just a couple minutes later. But because of this radio message, we do know that the next loop is already in progress.
Oh, yes, I hadn't even thought about that. Right. Someone's got to be there to hear that call and respond to it. Yes.
Yeah, so we do know that at this point already, there is another triangle out on the water.
Right, because at the very end of this segment that you have me on discussing today, Sally says it returns when everyone's dead, and so you think that Sally's death is the final trigger that restarts everything, but clearly that's not the case, because that other triangle already is there to respond. So maybe it's the first death, maybe it's Victor dying is the trigger? I guess we'll never know, really.
Yeah, it's an unanswerable question. And we do get this. I think there's another just nice moment with Jess 2, lit just completely in red, trying to reach Greg, and unsuccessfully through the radio, and all she gets is static. I think we do hear, like at the beginning, we hear a little bit of one of their messages, and it's partially broken up, but then it's all just static before she goes to follow Sally and gets to, I think, one of the most visually impressive moments in this film. And whenever I asked you which loop you wanted, you specifically mentioned the one with all the dead Sallys.
Yeah, I actually remember exactly what I wrote to you. I said I want the scene when she turns the corner and sees all the dead bodies. Yeah, this is such an incredible shot. First of all, I like that they hold on Jess. I counted it. They hold on her for 7 seconds of her staring at what she sees without us, the viewer, knowing what she sees. So I like that they really build up the anticipation of what is it are we going to see? What is it are we going to see? Obviously, by now, we know she's in a time loop. We know she's gone through it a bunch of times because of the number of notes and the number of lockets. But, we haven't seen any real, visceral, intense fallout from all these time loops. And then we cut to the scene, and it's just all of these dead Sallys. So every single time loop that's happening, Sally is ending up on this part of the ship, all cut up, and it's just this is not even remotely. I know that this is Sally, this is Jess number 2, but this isn't even remotely the second time that she's gone through this. And look what this poor woman is being killed over and over again, and it's just such a great shot.
It's not every single time, because in the first loop she was killed in the theater.
And okay, that's right. She gets shot in the theater. Right. Okay,
yeah,
that's
and
right.
Her and Downey both died in the theater, and
that's right.
Presumably were thrown overboard at some point by Jess 3.
That's right. So then that means we've even more loops then, because that means this isn't even every Sally.
Yeah, and I also love just how all this looks, because we do see Jess 2 give Sally her sweater in order to try to stop the bleeding. And then whenever we see the group of Sallys, we do see that we also see a lot of Jess's sweaters. Yep. So we know that previous Jesses also tried helping Sally.
And lots of those damn seagulls that are always in this movie here in this scene.
Yeah, and I do love, we do see seagull poop in in the hair of one of the Sallys. I noticed that too.
Yeah, and some of the seagulls are dead also, actually.
Oh, that I didn't see. I
Yeah.
noticed a lot of like feathers, but I didn't notice
Oh, I
any.
guess maybe those are feather. I guess I was viewing that as dead seagulls, but yeah, maybe that's just their feathers falling off.
Yeah, I
That's
think it's just, molted feathers.
okay. Yeah.
And then again, we get another slight difference as Jess 2 looks over the railing and she sees the battle between Jess 1 and Jess 3. And this again is different than the one that we saw in the first loop, because in the first loop Jess 3 had basically surrendered and then just basically jumped overboard, like, leaned backwards and flipped herself over the side of the ship. And in this one, we see the newest Jess 1 is, pretty brutally beating Jess 3 with a crowbar.
Yeah, and we don't hear this Jess 3 saying anything either. The
Mhm.
first time around, she said you have to kill them all to get out of here. This time we don't. I mean, it could be she's just too far away, but we don't even hear like mumbling or distant voices or anything like that.
That reminds me, I forgot to bring up, jumping back just really quickly into the armory with all the notes and the shattered mirror. I forgot to mention that we do have that like auditory flashback of Jess 3 repeating, you have to kill them all. And before she rejects that, um, and yells it into the mirror. But yeah, back to this. I think that it's interesting that this is kind of just increasing the overall level of violence this time
Yeah.
around.
Yes.
And the newest Jess 1 just kind of casually tosses that Jess 3 overboard herself.
It's almost like going back to the whole muscle memory aspect of it that you brought up before, that each Jess 1 as she gets on the ship is maybe a little more over the edge and a little more frazzled than the previous Jess 1s are because of the repetition.
Yeah. And, she has this discussion, this heart to heart with Sally, and Sally is having none of it. She just thinks that Jess is a crazy bitch.
Yeah. She's like, you have to trust me. It's just like, trust me? Trust you? What are you, crazy?
Yeah, just please don't hurt me anymore.
Yeah.
And then she, as like almost exactly as soon as Sally goes limp and dies, she hears the castaways on the overturned triangle and looks over the side of the ship and sees them off in the distance. And then she comes to the conclusion that it returns when everyone's dead.
Right.
And this is just the further descending into madness. Everything that she's been seeing has been leading her to this conclusion, has been driving her towards this specific madness, with the Just 3 saying you have to kill them all, and the notes that say, if they board, kill them all. And now the triangle physically returns after everyone else besides her is dead.
Right. The only way to get them to not board is to kill them all so the triangle comes back, and then she can stop the new ones from getting on. It's a real chicken and egg situation.
Yeah. And that is where I ended this loop. After she sees the new triangle, but before they board. Because right after she leaves the deck full of dead Sallys, then the third group of castaways have already boarded. So, is there anything else that you have to say about this specific loop and then about Triangle as a whole?
I guess the only other thing about this specific loop that I would point out is at one point, I believe it's when she's stabbing Downey and Sally in room 237. She says, "I'm sorry, but I love my son." And the movie's at this point makes you think that it's just she wants to get home so that her autistic son is not left alone and freaking out. Sorry, I've got to get home. He's special needs, and I have to get there, and I love him, so I need to be there for him. But of course, by the end of the movie, we see that line, "I'm sorry, but I love my son," is actually about keeping her son alive. It's a completely different meaning once you see the entire movie. And so again, I like some more of that foreshadowing of what goes on here in the middle of the movie, tying into those last 5-10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and I love that too. And one of the theories I've come up with is that I feel like she has at least like a good 75% memory of the previous loops, and in a way she is just going through the motions, because she knows that if things play out exactly the same way, because she has experience, because she talks about with her autistic son that everything has to happen the exact same way. And I think because of that, she's trying to do these loops the same way, so that way, because she knows if the greater loop resets, then she's able to get back to her son.
I actually took it as, I do think that her memory is erased. I take it as her memory erases as soon as she steps on the triangle. And I say that because when she hugs Greg before she gets on the triangle at the end, she says, "I'm sorry."
Mm-hmm.
And she's saying "I'm sorry" because at that point in time she knows what has happened, and she knows she's going to get on the boat and it's going to happen again. And so she's apologizing to him that, "I'm sorry, but I'm going to be killing you." And I think that then when she steps on the boat, that's when her memory resets.
Yeah, that's not too far off. Jay's theory was that whenever she sleeps, because she does almost immediately take a nap, and,
okay, right,
sleeps
yeah.
for a couple hours, and he thinks that is kind of what clears her memory, to where it makes the previous loop feel like a dream whenever she wakes up again. And I think I do agree with that for the most part, that I do think that as she repeats it more and more often, I think she has a clearer memory of what's gone on each time. But that's all my notes for this loop. Was there anything else that you wanted to say, like about the movie as a whole or anything?
I don't think so. I mean, this is definitely a top 10 mind F movie for me, which is a genre I like a lot. So I was happy to have an excuse to watch it again. And as I said, I watched it with my 12-year-old son. He was very pleased with himself that he actually pretty much figured it all out with very minimal questions.
Yeah, this is one that I think it can be figured out on a single viewing, but you have to be paying attention.
Yes.
And it's very easy to miss things on a single viewing and not fully understand what's going on in just a single viewing. And I think it does benefit from multiple viewings.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining me once again. For anybody else that hasn't heard you plug your other podcast projects, why don't you go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you online?
So I was the co-host for Escape from New York Minute and Flash Gordon Minute. Both of those are available on any of your podcatchers. And I keep the Facebook groups running as well. It's the Brains Library is the Escape from New York fan group. Holy cow! I'm completely spacing on. The Flash Gordon Minute Listeners Vortex is the Facebook group for Flash Gordon Minute.
And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter where I am at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook page, or a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join that to discuss this podcast, as well as anything time loop related at all. And
Kill them.
You have to kill them.
You have to kill them all.
I'm sorry, Eric.
Ah!
Every day's the same.
You have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
Every day's the same.
You have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
Every day's the same.
Everything is exactly the way it was before. Kill them.
Every day's the same.